Welcome to the next session on Startup Grind Virtual. I absolutely love these virtual conferences. I have to admit, it's awesome. Second one I've done, I did one last year. Really excited for the next 30 minutes, I have to admit, personally, and for what he has to share with you. But before I begin, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, because we are virtual. So all parts of the globe have been touched. Jumping straight in. So before I give the name of the title, absolute kudos to the people that came up with this title because I think it's absolutely brilliant. Today, we're going to be talking about from coining NFT to launching Flow, the story of Dete, Shirley, and Dapper Labs. So, Dete, welcome to today's panel. How are you doing, man? And how's everything going?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to be here. Very excited to be invited, and awesome to be able to share a bit of my story with all the folks at Startup Grind.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I'm personally excited because a bit of a backstory for the audience. So we actually, our company was built on Flow and still is, and we took an investment from you guys in 2021. So we've been working with Flow for the last couple of years, but this is the first time we've actually met. So yeah, really awesome to meet you and excited for this. I've got about 5 or 6 questions that I would like to ask, and I don't think we're going to have time for them, but we'll jump in, we'll touch upon them. And then at the end, if there's any time for some questions, we'll dig in and see what the audience have to ask as well. But I think the thing that I find the most interesting is, as it says from the title, from coining the word NFT. So, as the co-creator of CryptoKitties that people might not know, and to coining the word NFT, could you maybe just start off there of how that looked back in the day? I think was it 2017? Was it CryptoKitties?
That's right.
Um,
2017 is when
yeah,
both CryptoKitties and NFT spec ERC 721 went out.
yes. If maybe we could just touch upon that because the word NFT has had lots of coverage over the last 2 or 3 years, some good, some bad. But as the guy that came up with that name, let's start there and give the audience a bit of a color on what that looked like.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was a crazy time. 2017. There was a lot of fervor and excitement about the blockchain technology. Not a lot of people were using the term Web3 yet, and in particular, I got really excited in 2017. So I had been familiar with Bitcoin going all the way back to 2011, the very early days of Bitcoin. I found that technology absolutely fascinating. But I'm not really like a financial guy, a money guy. I'm a software guy. And so Bitcoin had some really basic scripting functionality, but like no one was really using that in any sort of meaningful way. And so in 2017, when Ethereum sort of proved to be reasonably mature, and it was suddenly the same underpinning technology as Bitcoin, but what was built on top of it was a programming environment and a programming language that really got my attention and the attention of Axiom Zen. So I was working at a company called Axiom Zen, and we were a startup foundry. I mean, Axiom Zen still exists, and they're the parent company of Dapper Labs, my current employer. And so the whole point of Axiom Zen was, hey, let's try new things with new technology. And so I basically pitched, let's do something on Ethereum. And so as a team, we laid out a bunch of different ideas. And the one idea we had that we all really loved was what ended up being called CryptoKitties. And what we loved about it was that the goal of it was personal, right? What's crazy about this technology is because it started with financial background, that was the lens through which everyone was looking at it. Is that this is about money, this is about tokenization, this is about financialization. And and obviously, when we were brainstorming ideas, we had ideas in that realm as well. But the reason that I personally and I think most of the team really liked the idea of CryptoKitties was because it really stretched the idea of what this technology could do. Now, this idea of an individually tracked piece of ownership on a blockchain wasn't net new. It hadn't sort of been named. There was no sort of concept of it. There was rare pepes existed. There was this thing, rare pepes, I believe, were built on this thing called colored coins on Bitcoin. And this idea that like you can own a singular thing rather than something that's money-like and collective, right? So when we have $5, we don't care if it's a single $5 bill or five singles. What we care about is the total amount. And the way that blockchains track money-like assets is literally just as a number. And so this idea of which money do you have, it's a meaningless statement, sort of like your bank account. Which bills do you have? It's a meaningless statement. And so when we started talking about CryptoKitties, we realized that we were going to have to track ownership in a fundamentally new way. And so we took a look at what other people had been doing in this space. And we saw the value of shared interfaces, right? I don't know how to talk about it in a non-engineer way, right? Like, how do you define a concept in a way that has a well-defined API so that multiple different application developers can all interact with that concept? And so, the classic example was ERC20, which defined fungible tokens, usually just called tokens. And it basically had the idea of like, hey, how many of these tokens do you have? Are they fractional? Like, can you divide them up? Like you can divide dollars into cents. And how do you transfer ownership of them and determine ownership of them? Obviously, that wasn't going to work for kitties because, just knowing, obviously kitties aren't fractional, but knowing how many kitties you have is only the start. You have to know which kitties you own. And so we took that ERC20 and we, as an inspiration, and we created ERC 721. So that was something I did. I wrote that. I published that in September of 2017. And as I was writing this spec, I was like, well, we have to call it something. and I didn't know what to call it. And I had some discussion with people inside the company, and I had some discussion with people outside the company. And I ended up settling on non-fungible token. And the feedback I got from my coworkers was, well, that's like, no one's going to understand that. Like, no one's going to care like that. You're using the word fungible that most people don't know. You're using the negative of that word, right? Yeah. And then token, like the token part was the part that I could defend very strongly as like, look, it's not, because one of the other ideas was something like deed, like this is the proof of ownership. But I really wanted to emphasize, especially with CryptoKitties, that the thing that you owned was what was on the blockchain. It wasn't a deed, right? Like a deed isn't the house. The deed is the proof that you own the house. And I wanted to emphasize that assets tracked in digital blockchains can be meaningfully valuable on their own. They don't have to represent ownership of something else. Now, that's not to say I didn't understand that maybe you could represent a home deed as an NFT on a blockchain, but I just wanted to emphasize that wasn't the limit of it. And so in the end, I was like, well, maybe if we just shorten it to NFT, and I made a conscious effort. I was like, I called it non-fungible token once at the beginning, and then the rest of the document, I explicitly called it NFT. And I hoped, well, at least us engineers will have a common terminology. And if other people want to use other words, that's fine. But at least as builders, we now have a word that we can use to discuss this. And I think because that idea, especially once CryptoKitties came out and people really, understood, really viscerally understood by seeing people play CryptoKitties, by playing CryptoKitties themselves, that they could have an individual piece of property tracked on a blockchain that had unique properties different from what everyone else's kitty looked like or acted like, behaved like, its data was different, that suddenly people understood that this concept of an individually tracked piece of ownership on a blockchain was worthy of a name, and then they picked up on that name NFT. And so it stuck, and I'm pleased I shortened it because I don't know if it would have caught on as well.
Absolutely. And just I'm just super interested to, how does it feel when the whole world uses a word that you essentially coined, when you're hearing it from every news channel, from Jimmy Fallon's show to everybody else? It must have, I mean, at the beginning, I'm guessing it's different towards the end, but how does that feel? And the second question is, why cats and not dogs? What was around the cats? I mean, it has a ring to it, but yeah. Is there a reason behind that?
For the how it feels, I mean, it's been quite a roller coaster, right? Like going from being very excited about people using that term on other projects and seeing like the creativity that came, like artists coming out and creating these things, and like people creating communities around NFT collections, and just like all of the wild creativity that came, that was spurred by that concept, by that technical standard, and by our by the CryptoKitties example. I is one of the greatest achievements of my life, right? Like by naming this idea and allowing people to like build on that idea, it just, the amount of human creativity that created was great. Even in the early days, it really made me nervous how some people were treating it as like a magical thing. Like if you call it an NFT, then suddenly it has value on its own. And that always made me very nervous. And of course, time has proven that out, where people, like, the point was to create a digital asset that people could truly own, that was independent of the creator, and that the ownership of that thing could persist beyond the existence of the creator, outside the control of the creator. That gives, I do believe that gives more value to the end user. But that doesn't mean it's worth $1 million, right? It means it could be worth $1 million. But that $1 million value has to come from something intrinsic in what the NFT is, what the NFT is to individuals. And I think that, the world got out over its skis, and when I saw people, famous people who were coming out and were sort of treating this as like almost like a magical totem, I got very nervous. And of course now it's like a curse word, right? Like the word NFT it's the punchline of a joke. It's more often than not, when I hear it, it's because someone is making fun of the idea. And I get it. Like, I think that a lot of things that went out with that name, they didn't have a lot of thought behind them. They didn't have a lot of creativity behind them. And I understand people's dismissal of that. And my hope is that people understand that concept of an individually tracked piece of ownership on a decentralized platform that no one owns, no one controls, no one can shut down, is value beyond, well, the funny picture of a monkey that someone paid, $1 million for.
Oh, I think it's crazy. I'm going to park the question about kitties, because I want to know about that. But I think for me, just in the essence of time, I want to just really now move into how Flow came about, because essentially you're the chief architect at Flow, and Flow has become a real amazing blockchain and business. And it would be great just to firstly explain how you went from CryptoKitties on Ethereum to then starting Flow, and really then how you kind of caught lightning in a bottle twice with Top Shot. So if we can maybe just move into talking about Flow and then how Top Shot came about.
Yeah, I mean, Flow was a direct response to both the success and the failure of CryptoKitties. So CryptoKitties was a success. We got, we were written up in the New York Times. Vice did a piece on us. Vox did a piece on, like, all of these, like, I think it got a kind of attention that I felt was mostly positive and mostly on point with the idea that, like, hey, people want to own these digital assets that has value. And of course, there's lots of talk about the crazy speculation as well, but like mostly very happy with the attention it got. But the failure of CryptoKitties is that we were built on Ethereum, and that technology still has a very hard cap on throughput, right? And in terms of like how many people can be using it at the same time. We had about 10,000 DAUs at the peak of CryptoKitties, which is a tiny number if you have any information of experience with consumer software. But we were using up about a third of the capacity of the entire blockchain. This single global entity, we were using up a third for about 10,000 users. So like imagine a software platform that's intended to like serve the whole world, and yet its capacity is under 100,000 people using it daily. So that was like a real wake-up call. So we knew we had to find something that had greater capacity. And honestly, when we went out and looked at how people were trying to achieve greater capacity, that almost all of the proposals every single proposal to produce a blockchain with higher capacity made our lives harder as software developers and made compromises that we would have to make as we were building the software is significant. And I don't want to go into the details, they're very technical, but like fundamentally, there was a very simple, straightforward model for how to build software on a platform like Ethereum that's monolithic. And all of the proposals for how to make these networks faster basically broke up that monolith into pieces. And now suddenly you have to deal with asynchrony and all of this stuff. And it was hard enough to build an application in that platform. And so we felt that the scaling problem shouldn't be solved by the application developers. It should be solved by the blockchain itself. The second thing that we discovered when building CryptoKitties is that we realized that loads of people wanted to extend CryptoKitties. They wanted to build stuff on top of it. Things like there was a whole fashion project called Kitty Hats where you could dress up your cats. And that idea of people extending it, again, it depended on having a monolithic and atomic execution environment. And so we wanted to maintain that. And then the final thing, though, was just the user experience. To this day, the only way to really use Ethereum where you own your own assets is to install a Chrome plugin or similar, or get a special browser or something like that. Like you can't just go to a website and start using this stuff. You can't just download a mobile app and start using this technology. The way that it tracks your ownership is fundamentally incompatible with the way most software is built. And we made some changes. We were able to come up with ideas for how you build a blockchain to make it much more compatible with the user experience that people expect. And so the two big features that we put into Flow to enable this is, one, we support the secure enclave that's in everybody's phone and increasingly in people's laptops as well, where there is a secure chip in your computer that even the CIA can't break into. And we know that because the CIA and the FBI have asked Apple how to break into it. And they've said, no, you can't. Even we can't.
Yeah, so if the CIA want to steal your CryptoKitties, they're out of luck, right?
They're out of luck. And so we built that support into the blockchain. And then the other big thing we did was we built this idea of what we call account linking, where as a new user, you can come in, sign up using your email address and password, log in with Google, log in with Facebook. And obviously, if you do that, right, you don't have full control of your assets. But later, as you become a more experienced crypto user, you can use this account linking to create an account that you own and control, and then you take ownership of that of those assets without having to move them around. And again, it gets a little technical, but critically, it makes for a smooth transition from a new user who's just trying to understand this technology, just wants email and password to get into it, to that user that is more advanced and understands that owning their own assets and controlling their own keys has a lot of value, and making sure that they can do that in the most convenient and easy way, which is like using the hardware security that they carry with them every single day.
So I mean, just so the audience know, we've got Bruce behind the scenes who keeps giving me warnings to say how you've got 5 or 10 minutes. So I don't want to lose my questions. And Bruce, I'm calling you out because everybody needs to know that we've got 5 minutes left. So with the 5 minutes left, I just want to touch upon, I think, well, let me ask you, Dete, what do you think in the last 5 minutes you think is important for people in the audience to know about? Is it about if you're looking to build a project on the blockchain, what to do? What would be your suggestion in the last 5 minutes? I'll hand it over to you to take the floor.
Well, I think we could come back to sort of why CryptoKitties was important to me, and why Flow is so different than other blockchains, and fundamentally why someone who might be in the audience who has seen all of the crazy speculation, all of the, let's just call them scams that have happened around crypto, why they might not want to write off this technology. And so I would start with saying, look, the financial aspect of blockchains, that's baked in. And I think that's a plus, right? The analogy I use is that money is to blockchain what email is to the internet, right? That email was the first application of the internet that people understood back in the 90s. People didn't, there weren't even web browsers, right? Like people didn't know what the internet was going to be for in all of its glory, but they sure understood email, right? Because they didn't have to put a stamp on an envelope and they could send email across the globe. Email has never gone away. In all those 30 years, we have not gotten rid of email. It's still how you log into Spotify. But it's not the most interesting thing about about the internet. And I don't think money is going to be the most interesting thing about blockchain. And so what are the other things that are interesting about blockchain? And I think there's two that are relatively easy for people to understand if you're in the tech industry. The first one is that once you deploy code to a blockchain, it is no longer under your control. Now, this sounds scary, right? But there is a freedom that comes from that in the sense that you no longer now have a responsibility to maintain that software, right? You put it out there, it's running. You can extend it, you can layer new things on top of it, but you don't have to like change it and maintain it and keep it running. And so when you think about, so there's two ways to think about it. One is as a builder, it's infrastructure you don't have to maintain, you don't have to pay the cost of that will exist even if your company pivots or shuts down, right? And then from the user perspective, imagine the advantage of that, knowing that the product you depend on is built on this eternal infrastructure, this autonomous infrastructure, that even if the company changes its mind or goes under, that product will remain, right? And we just have to look at things like Twitter shutting down its API, Reddit shutting down its API. Imagine if those things were built on decentralized infrastructure, they couldn't be shut down. And that's incredibly powerful. And so then that brings us to the second piece, which is what we call composability. And that is when you combine trustless and autonomous infrastructure with interoperability, API interoperability. And now suddenly, and any entrepreneurs have talked to investors about building on another platform, they almost always get shut down, right? Like, because the investor is like, look, I don't want to invest in you when Facebook or whoever it is could shut you down with like a snap of the fingers, or recreate your product in theirs and change the APIs such that it breaks yours. And in the world of blockchain, that doesn't happen. I can build on other people's smart contracts without permission and without fear that will be shut down. And that's why Kitty Hats was so powerful, was because Kitty Hats could be built and they didn't have to ask for permission and they didn't have to act in fear that we would shut them down. They could do whatever they wanted. And if they were creating value for our users, then they were going to succeed. And if they weren't creating value for our ecosystem, then they weren't going to succeed. And that is that's to me, that's like the purest form of, letting the market and letting end users decide what will succeed. And I think that those two things are incredibly powerful. And I think that it will, in time, I think we'll see it as transformative as open source was, 20 years ago, in terms of creating new opportunities for new kinds of businesses to be built without having to reinvent the wheel every time.
I think you've touched upon a couple of things, especially as an entrepreneur, and when you're going to raise money and speak to investors, there has been a huge influx of interest in the blockchain. And I think how you've explained it so well and so simple to people, that this lives forever. And that is really why you're seeing the value in these NFT projects like CryptoKitties and like the punks and that were created years ago, that were like, are these the original NFT projects? They're going to be here in 10, 20, 30 years. And that's what's super, super interesting, is that once it's there, like you say, it's scary because you can't change it. So if you are a developer, you can't quickly change it. But again, that's what makes it beautiful, which is why CryptoPunks have V1 punks, because apparently there was a mistake. And again, it's history, it's art, it's like the Banksies of the world. Well, look, we've got 5 minutes left. I've been sent a couple of questions from the audience, and one of them I want to just touch upon because it really does follow on from what you were just saying. It's from a guy called Greg. Hey, Greg, how are you? It says, are there any predictions on the NFT market? Is there any prospect for real-world, non-art NFT implementations? And if so, what are the blockers for now? So I'm thinking, I don't know if Greg means this, but things like buying property using a smart contract. So the title deed is a smart contract, airline tickets, etc., etc. What are your thoughts and comments on that?
Yeah, I am confident that we will see digital, like especially ticketing, right? Digital ticketing and moving into NFTs. Now, it's funny because I think you gave two examples that are least likely. There are a variety of security reasons why airlines and people like the TSA do not want
Well, I'm not
airline
pitching
tickets to
right
be
now for investment, by
freely
the way.
to be freely transferable, right? And so that transfer needs to be mediated in some fashion. And so while it is the case that maybe there are there are advantages to using infrastructure that is fully auditable and open to do that, it doesn't take full advantage of the blockchain, like the complete transfer of assets. Because you're going to have that. And the same with housing, right? Like it can't be the case that if somebody uses the keys to their cryptos, that house, that no one can ever live in that house again, right? We need somebody who has that override. We need, we have rules about who can own houses in certain places and knowing who owns those houses, so that if there is an issue with taxation or whatnot, that the governments have a way to get in touch with those people. And so on the other hand, like concert tickets, you could definitely see that. You could see things like subscriptions or memberships in a fan club being represented by NFTs. And so I think that's really interesting. And I also think that there is an opportunity for people to create representations of real world collectibles. We're already seeing people that are saying, hey, we're going to take art and we're going to put it in a very carefully controlled environment so that it maintains its value, and you can invest in that art. Having that on a fully transparent, auditable platform with free transfer of ownership feels like an improvement of that model as well. And so I think that so I think that there will see instances of NFTs being used to represent real world assets, but I think that you have to work through the details before you just like assume that this is an answer to all the questions.
Yeah, and I think just before we kind of wrap up and say that what I find so fascinating and have to thank you for is it's so valuable to get this knowledge. Like you've said, Greg asked a question about this. For me, giving some suggestions, which I'm not an expert, but you have other ones. There's some amazing ideas out there being built, and you have to fully understand what's available to you and what can be done to make the big successes. And I think that, we're very lucky to have yourself talk about this. And there's been a couple of ideas there that I'm sure people will be writing down and hopefully working on. But unfortunately, Dete, that is up time. I wish we had another half an hour because I still have a lot more questions. But before we go, where can people find you if they do want to learn a bit more, and where's the best place to reach you?
So if you want to take a look at the blockchain we built with the idea of creating, a better experience for users and a better experience for developers, that's at flow.com, FLOW. And then of course, dapperlabs.com, where if you search for NBA Top Shot, those are our consumer facing applications. And if people want to check out what a sports collectible experience that is blockchain on the back end, but like a very user-friendly experience on the front end that doesn't at all necessarily feel like blockchain until you get into that, I would encourage that you take a look at something like Top Shot.
Awesome. Well, we best say goodbye before Bruce bounces us out. But thank you, Dee. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it. And thank you again for all you've brought to the world, and looking forward to seeing what's next for Flow and Dapper. So enjoy the rest of your day. And Bruce, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Simon.
Thanks, Dee.